Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today what I'd love to get to is I would love to show you how to stretch tight quads, but more importantly, I would love to show you what you need to do to stop them from getting tight again. And I think it's a really important idea because as a physical therapist, we see a lot that there's this idea currently where stretching is a thing that you have to keep doing, that the best way to get you to a point where you feel looser is only earned once you're consistently stretching and stretching and stretching and stretching to the point where you eventually start to feel looser. And the idea is perpetuated and I guess highlighted by this concept that in order to stay loose, you have to keep stretching. And it's not necessarily true. It definitely feels that way and does come across that way. But we know that the human body isn't designed to be tight. It's obviously an abnormal thing that happens. But because so many people are tight and traditional stretching hasn't generally been super effective at making genuine immediate change, so it promotes this idea that the only way that you can become more supple is that if you just consistently stretch. But what we see is that if you can also address the root cause for why that's become tight, why that quadricep muscle is being asked to stay tight, then any quadricep stretching that you do suddenly becomes a compounding exercise. That you stretch it and you come out of it this loose, you stretch it again, you get looser again, and you can keep chipping away at that until you're at a point where you're loose enough, where you want to be and where you're happy to be. So, but unfortunately what a lot of people find when they're stretching is that we do all this beautiful stretching and then the next day you're back to where you started, and then we have to keep doing this and then hope that that needle moves just a little bit and you can see some change. So hopefully by the end of this video, you'll know how to stretch your quadriceps in a really efficient, fast, really impactful way. So you see an immediate difference. But then what you can do, one or two things to look at to address to make sure that it doesn't keep tightening again. So hopefully it's useful for you in that sense. So before we get into it, obviously if you do go on to like the video, please leave a like below. It really helps support the channel. It helps these ideas and these videos get out to more people. And obviously to support the channel, it'd be great if you could subscribe below. It just means that you'll get the videos that we put out and you won't miss them. And that would be great. So I guess the first part of this is probably the most simple, and it's all simple to begin with, but we want to show you probably the most effective quadricep stretch that I've ever seen as a physical therapist. Now you can use a band, a power band, to ramp this up further, and I'll show you how to do that at the end. But the best way to stretch your quadriceps is via the couch stretch. And for those who don't know, we cover it a lot on the channel, but it was sort of popularized by Kelly Starrett. He's a very, very sort of famous physical therapist. He's a really good thinker. The profession owes a lot to him and what he's doing and what he's thinking about and the problems that he's solving. But the couch stretch is a brilliant way to free up your quads really quickly. But we want to add a few little tweaks in that just to make it more powerful. So how that basically looks is if you're going to do this on the floor, you want to have your knee in the corner, your shin up against something, and you want your front leg up into a lunging position. Now, this is quite a challenging position for a lot of people to get into if they're not used to it. So the reason why it's called the couch stretch is that if you can do this on a couch or on a chair, then basically that knee comes up a lot higher, the shin's up against the back of the couch or the chair, and obviously this leg is still on the ground, so it just lifts everything up a lot more and decreases the demands at the hip. But this is a brilliant way to stretch your quads because the knee's fully bent, but also part of the muscles that I guess flex the hip and act as quadriceps do cross the hip as well. So we want to make sure that we're trying to extend that hip to capture everything. So again, this can be tough for a lot of people, but it's a really powerful exercise. So we want to make sure that those hips don't shift off to the side and take the tension out of it, but simultaneously we want to make sure that the position that you're in is capturing that tightness or the best version of that tightness for yourself. So you might find it at the top of the thigh here, just below the hip crease. You may find it all the way down through the thigh. Either way, go hunting for what you can find. And the way to optimize this as a stretch, and the reason why this is so powerful, is we want to do some contract relaxing to, in a nice way, force the muscles to give instantaneously. So how that looks is that we take a big deep breath in, and then we tense those quads for 10 seconds. So that can mean pushing your foot back or pushing your shin back into the back of the chair or the wall. It can also mean just tensing up those muscles, squeezing your glutes, the hips in a good position, tensing it for 10 seconds, and then relaxing. And then what you should find is that you should be able to come back a little bit further into the stretch than what you could before, And then you want to repeat that process until you stop making change. So a deep breath in, squeeze everything, push your foot back into the wall, hold it for a few seconds, and then relax. And again, what we can do to make this even more impactful is that we can place your hip and place the band into the crease of your hip, and then take that back up against another wall, and then same thing again, coming up into that same high position. Now ideally this band will be pulling directly into the camera. It's obviously off to the side here because that's all I have to connect it to, but this biases the joint capsule at the front. And a stiff joint capsule can ask the tissue that crosses over the front of that to tighten up, in support, but also in the process of becoming stiff. So if this hip is stiff, the front, any tissue that crosses that hip can also become restricted. So using a band around sort of the gluteal fold, pulling that hip forwards, really opens up the front of that hip and gives you another piece of this puzzle. So again, deep breath in, tense everything, push your foot back into the wall, hold it for a few seconds, and then relax, and then you can take it up further again. And again, you can push your hip forward if you want to make that stretch a little bit more obvious through the front here. So from a stretching perspective, the couch stretch is by far the best stretch to loosen tight quads I've ever seen. Then adding that contract, relax on top of it includes your brain, tenses up the muscles, and then as you relax, that peak tensing is often followed by peak relaxation, and your nervous system feels comfortable letting go of that tightness. And you should immediately feel those muscles at the front of your thighs are looser. And if you don't, then you've done something wrong, because you should always expect that to change straight away. Now, the token sort of quadricep stretch that we see a lot is okay to do, but it doesn't really wind everything up as much. It doesn't wind up the hip. It doesn't put as much tension through here. You can do it, but you want to make sure that you do it in a way that you can still tense, relax. So you got to push back into your hand, make sure that you can see a change, go further, tense, relax, keep going till you see a difference. Now, so I'd highly recommend that as a stretch to quickly free up those tissues. But I guess the main idea behind this video is we now want to have a conversation about why that's become tight in the first place. Because like most things in the body, everything happens for a reason. Nothing is just tight or just weak or just becomes painful. If you don't know what it is immediately, often it's a covert, relatively hidden dysfunction that you accrue through modern living. And quadriceps tightness is no different. It's the same as hamstring tightness, glute tightness, calf tightness. The single biggest reason why, or two of the biggest reasons why quadriceps get tight. The first is that your back is stiff. The second is that you sit a lot. Now, we'll get to the back idea in a second, but in terms of sitting, if you're often in a position where your knees and hips are bent at sort of 90 degrees and you're on the computer a lot, like most things, if you're not expressing that range of motion that you have, then the tissue around those joints and in between starts to become tighter, because without you realizing it, you're asking that to happen. You're not expressing that normal range, so it just doesn't get used and it becomes tighter. So if you do tend to sit a lot, it may explain why those quads keep getting tight. But the thing that I see probably more so, and probably has the most direct impact on this, and it goes probably hand in hand with sitting, is spinal dysfunction. So there's a nerve that goes down through your quads, called your quadriceps, your femoral nerve, just your quads, quadriceps, femoral nerve. It originates at your lower back. So where your rib cage ends, there's 2 or 3 levels below there and down, which constitute your lower back. The top sort of few levels there, the nerves that come from that form the femoral nerve as it goes down the front of your thigh through the quads. So what can happen is, if you are in a bad posture all the time, if you're in a position where this section is consistently under tension and it becomes stiff, it can essentially pull a lot of the slack out of the nerves. And what that can do is it can create muscular tightness as well. Not only that, if you have some spinal dysfunction, and we're not necessarily talking about disc bulges or nerve root impingements or anything sinister that we equate with nasty back pain. We're just talking about rusty joints, tight muscles, weakened musculature from being in a bad posture all the time, or a bad shape more often than not. And if you become a little bit tighter and potentially weaker, your body will sacrifice peripheral function through the legs to prioritize sort of more central stability, central function. So we see the same thing with the hamstrings, but if your back is a little bit less stable, or the musculature of your back isn't necessarily working and activating to stabilize that spine, and the spinal levels that associate with your quads get tight, we get this sort of chain reaction of dysfunction that flows through the areas. So it starts at your lower back and it can end up with your quads being tight. So in order to stop having to stretch your quads forever, we need to make sure that we're improving the health and function of your spine. And a really good way to do that is with a foam roller. You can use a tennis ball or cross ball, it works the same anyway. But a very, very simple back stretch. We don't necessarily want to target the base of your spine, nor do we want to target the base of your rib cage. We want to go looking in between for areas that feel stiff and tight. And what you should hopefully find is, once you've found a spot that feels tight and stiff, we just want to get you to stay here. So it's not as well known as it should be, but rolling with a roller through your spine doesn't do anything, or doesn't make a lasting impact like staying on a particular spot. So if you can find a spot, again, you can recline back if you need to. You can have some pillows here, and again, lift your bottom up. You can bring your bum down or your bottom down to tension up the spine. Find the spot that feels comfortable for you. So for me, this feels comfortable. It may look a bit awkward, but if I come across to one side, it feels a little bit stiffer for me on this side than it does on that side. So again, it's probably no coincidence that a quad that's tight may be associated with stiffness on the same side of the back. But the idea is, once you found it, you want to stay here until you feel like it starts to soften, and then you want to systematically work up a little bit or down a little bit, depending on where you feel the stiffness and tightness in your back is. And then once you've freed that up, you should feel like that quad also doesn't feel as tight. Now, it may not necessarily reflexively ask that muscle to give as much as the couch stretch does with the contract relax stretching, or the PNF model. But what you'll find is if you can de-stiffen that spine, then as your body sort of recalibrates and sort of returns more to normal than it was before, you won't feel like that quad tightens back up again, or it won't tighten up as much. So whether you'll see an immediate improvement straight away, or whether you should see a compounding improvement over time, a very short amount of time, you should still see change. And your baseline of where your quad tightness is should get better and better the more you do this. Because if you see that you're back to square one again, then something's gone wrong with your spine again. Either you've just got back into those same shapes, that back's become stiff and tight again, it's been overloaded, and that quad's going to get tight again. So we need to make sure that we're looking at things not just as an isolated muscle being tight, but looking at the body as this complex system of systems that ask things to be a certain way without us realizing. So if you're not prioritizing good postures, if you're not prioritizing good spinal mechanics in terms of mobility and strength, then you can't expect your peripheral muscles to be loose and strong and stable and functioning normally. So if you're someone who suffers constant quadricep tears or quadricep tightness, if that plagues you, there's generally going to be something wrong with your back. Whether it's something nasty, which is maybe less likely, but mechanically and functionally, that mid to low spine isn't doing what it needs to be doing on a daily basis. And you need to double check the positions that you're putting it in if you want to solve that problem long term. So obviously freeing it up, getting it stronger is important as well, but the mobility aspect can make a huge difference very, very quickly, and you deserve to see that. So hopefully that helps give a little bit of perspective as to how to stretch your quads. And there's a million ways to stretch your quads, but the couch stretch with the PNF contract relax is the best thing I've seen. You can add the band if you want to add a little bit more to it. Start on a chair, work your way down to the floor if you can tolerate it. If you can't tolerate it, then it just tells you that there's a problem there. You can get better at that and improve on that over time. And then once you've stretched it out, you've got to make sure that you're following that up with better spinal shapes, better spinal function. And then when those two things are at a good enough level, or as you get to that level, you should just see progress. And if you don't, there's something there that needs to change that you haven't quite addressed yet. So please let me know in the comments how you go. Again, please leave a like, subscribe, support the channel if you could. But until tomorrow, until next time, we'll see you there.